Remember when musicians were on the cover of Rolling Stone and pictures of wanted criminals were in the post office? I'm Charlie Sykes, and Sunday Insight starts right now. Good morning and welcome to Sunday Insight. In the week that was, two words: heat wave. We sweltered under temperatures that pushed the heat index over 100 degrees. And just remember, that's what we were hoping for back in December. The biggest municipal bankruptcy in American history. Detroit goes belly up. Paul McCartney rocks Miller Park. The state Supreme Court says that MMSD has to fix that leaky deep tunnel under downtown Milwaukee. It turns out groundwater's been leaking into the tunnel, wrecking the foundations of buildings like the downtown Boston store. The tab could run to tens of millions of dollars. The stock market hit all-time highs last week. The Brewers start the second half of the season in last place, but the Packers unveil their spectacular new addition to Lambeau Field. Protesters are back in the state capitol and back defying police orders. And on the jobs front, Wisconsin added 13,800 private sector jobs in the month of June. But we start with the verdict and the reaction in the case that has polarized the nation. George Zimmerman was found not guilty of second-degree murder in the shooting death of teenager Trayvon Martin. The jury concluded that Zimmerman had acted in self-defense, but the verdict did not end the controversy. Protests erupted around the country, some of them violent. The Obama administration says the Department of Justice is considering filing federal charges against Zimmerman despite his acquittal. And Attorney General Eric Holder called for the repeal of so-called stand your ground laws that allow victims to defend themselves without first running away. Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Michael Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litchens, political strategist Lynn DeBruin, and RightWisconsin.com managing editor Brian Fraley. Let's start with the first obvious question. Did the jury in the Zimmerman case get the verdict right?
Well, from what I know, yes, I think they did. And I think they also got it right in the case in Wisconsin. So I think actually the justice worked this time.
Okay, Michael Holt.
Absolutely not. You know, Zimmerman negated any claim for self-defense because he initiated all the action. Just because he got his butt whooped doesn't mean that all of a sudden he can pull out a gun and kill somebody. You know, the reality is, now there's a push with the Justice Department. They collected over 1 million signatures on a petition in one day. And those weren't just black folks, they were white folks.
Okay.
You know, I was just reading about this case in Houston, Leonard and I were talking about it, where a black woman who was accosted by a white man, and the headlines said black woman, big bold letters. She was accosted and she was caught up in her car and she shot him. She's being charged with murder and they say she'll be convicted. So I mean, it's always this double standard.
Okay, well, is there a double standard? Do you agree, Michelle Litchens?
I don't, and I believe the jury did the right thing in both the case in Florida and the case in Milwaukee recently. But I think the only reason that we're talking about this today is because we are not allowed as a society to have an honest conversation about race. We don't openly talk about what we really think. You know, we are so held by being politically correct all the time.
Okay, so what would an honest conversation be?
Well, actually, I brought up some of those ideas to friends, and they said, you can't say that on TV. You're going to sound like you're racist. And I said, that's exactly what the problem is. We have an education problem in the inner cities. And as a white person, I can't go in there and fix it. You know, taxpayers are paying for 73% of the births in the city of Milwaukee. We're not talking about that. And you've got a group of people that are angry about it. We want something done, but we can't have an open conversation about how we can fix it.
Okay, well, let's get your take up, Brian Fraley. Michael Holt says the jury got it wrong in the Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman case. Did they get it wrong?
From what I've seen from the evidence that I saw by watching this local crime story in Florida, it seems like the jury got it right. And, you know, I'm not alone in thinking that, and it's not just, you know, white people that think that.
Well, you know, 3 weeks ago, the week you were gone, I said when Jeff Wagner was the host that he would not be convicted. I mean, it was pretty obvious.
Right.
You know,
a lot of legal experts thought that.
Yeah, you know, I mean, the prosecution's case was really kind of weak, based upon the information that was out there and their witnesses and the way they conducted the trial. It was pretty obvious that he would get off. But again, this is also about one of the reasons why so many people were mad. This is also about racial profiling. Now, they can say this is not about race all they want, but if a white kid was walking through that neighborhood, would Zimmerman have approached him at all? No, and everybody.
Well, we don't know.
See, I agree with you on that. In all probability, I agree with you on that. And I do think, unlike Michelle, I do think that there's enough statistics that show that these laws are being applied inappropriately or unfairly, unequally, and that more African Americans are getting charged with murder in these type of situations than when it's reversed. So I agree with all that. It's just when you get to the Trayvon Martin case, as I found the evidence, it did look like Zimmerman
the
really
way
was
this was
in
framed.
trouble.
See, I think the real tragedy here is, and Brian was right when he said this was a local crime story, but rather than treat it like a local crime story that should have been judged on the facts and the evidence, what happened was it was politicized. It was framed by the media with a certain narrative that this was a white racist wannabe cop who was, racially profiling this innocent, black teenager. Then you had the President of the United States came in and said, if I had a son, it would look like Trayvon. And then on Friday, he said that could have been me. And what happened was people began to see it in these racialized, politicized terms. And what happened at the trial was the facts didn't match the narrative. And yet that has not stopped people from trying to score political points. Now, you mentioned this 1 million signatures. I guess one of my questions would be, so what? Really, do we have mob justice in this country? Do we have a referendum on who gets criminally charged? The man was acquitted by a jury of his peers. Do we really want the federal government in to try to criminally charge him after he's already been acquitted?
Well,
just simply because it's politically popular?
This is about a violation of civil rights, and that's what they're actually, and they're doing the proper things. And they're not tearing down, rioting, whatever. They're appealing to the U.S. Justice Department to investigate and possibly charge this person, and then you'll go to court again.
Okay, and now Brian Fraley, what do you think the Department of Justice is going to do?
I think they're going to charge. I think they're going to charge him. They're not going to let this go. I mean, they are swayed by the 1 million people at Change.org and these bogus protests that Al Sharpton is coordinating.
Okay, Michelle Lynch, what do you think?
I actually don't think that they have the grounds to do anything at the federal level, but I think they are going to continue to use this, and they're going to go back to stand your ground legislation and try to, they couldn't get any gun control passed at the federal level, so now they're going to.
Well, it is interesting that they're talking about repealing the stand your ground legislation, which has nothing to do with this case. It was not part of the case. It played no role in George Zimmerman's acquittal, and yet it's a way of changing the subject. If the decision is made on the Constitution, it's made on the law, they're not going to bring charges. I just have no confidence in this administration that it won't make a political decision. So what has your glass half full and what has your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table, Michael Holt.
Several weeks ago, I predicted that gas prices in Milwaukee would go up 30 to 40 cents a gallon. I was right, but believe it or not, that's half full. Half empty is, I just left Chicago where gasoline was $4.29 a gallon, and you had to get through 25 tolls to get to it.
Michelle Litchens.
My glass is half full because Charles Barkley had the courage to stand up and say, not only are there some white racists out there, but there are black racists out there too. So he stood up and he talked honestly about an issue that too many people are afraid to address. But my glass is half empty because I think he's going to be ostracized, and a lot of people aren't going to stand up and do the same thing.
Linda Bruin.
Well, my glass is half full because a 9-month-old Chinese boy is in stable condition after being stabbed 90 times by his mother with a pair of scissors. But my glass is half empty because the Chinese government has returned that child to the care of her mother and of his mother, and they are not charging her.
Brian Fraley.
Yeah, and if it was a woman baby, they would have let her abort it with the one-child policy. Look, half empty, Brewers season, it's really over, even though the season's only half over. Half full, it's still fun to go to Miller Park. I was there last night, and hey, Packer season right around the corner.
Okay, my glass is half full because a Milwaukee County judge issued a temporary restraining order telling Mayor Tom Barrett and the city of Milwaukee that they cannot enforce the now defunct residency rule. It's half empty because Mayor Barrett and the city fathers still think that the law doesn't apply to them. I guess laws only apply to the rest of us. So where's the outrage over all of the other murders in the country? We're going to continue this, and our unions having second thoughts about Obamacare. More Sunday Insight still ahead. And as we go to break, President Obama hosts President Bush for the presentation of the former president's 5,000th Point of Light Volunteer Award. The two shared warm words for each other.
The fact that you're such a gentleman and such a good and kind person, I think, helps to reinforce that spirit of service. So on behalf of all of us, let me just say that we are surely a kinder and gentler nation because of you, and we can't thank you enough.
First, of course, thank President Ms. Obama for this wonderful hospitality. It's like coming home for Barbara and me, with the rest of you just coming to this magnificent house and being greeted by this superb hospitality knows no bounds.
So what about all the others? During the trial of George Zimmerman, there were more than 50 murders just in the city of Chicago, most of them young black men. For the most part, we don't know their names. The president didn't comment on their deaths. The networks didn't report on them. So where was the outrage? Or is black on black crime not as newsworthy? And then there's the case in Milwaukee of Darius Simmons, a 13-year-old boy who was brutally gunned down by his elderly neighbor who thought he had stolen some guns. The shooting was captured on videotape, and the killer, John Spooner, pled insanity, was quickly convicted of first-degree murder. And in fact, on Friday, his insanity plea was rejected. Some media outlets tried to link the death of Darius Simmons to the death of Trayvon Martin. Are there parallels? Is it a parallel case, Brian Fraley, first of all?
No, other than the fact that a gun was used and an African-American teenager was shot, there are no parallels. There were witnesses. This was on videotape. This was a white guy killing an unarmed African-American who was taking the garbage in from his house next door. Absolutely no parallels to the Trayvon Martin case.
And there was no confrontation. There was no self-defense. None of that. There's no stain. None of that. Did the jury? You mentioned this before. Did the jury get the verdicts right in this particular case?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And this is a case where I believe this man would kill again, from his statements himself, not just the video, but anyone who's seen the video. This is such a classic premeditated murder. This, you know, if we were in another state, he'd probably have gotten the death penalty.
Okay, now, Michael, you wanted the harder questions here. You know, this was a big story in Milwaukee, and this was a big story nationally. I think it is legitimately gets a lot of coverage, but we live in a community where generally, if a young black person is killed, if it is not by a white person, it's regional news in brief. So I guess that question is, where is the outrage? Why do we focus? Why do we know Trayvon Martin's name, but we don't know the names of any of those other 50 people that were killed during the trial in the city of Chicago?
Yeah, and in Chicago, actually, with 507 murders. And interestingly, the police were only able to solve like 180 something. You know, it's become so status quo. And you're right. The Journal Sentinel puts it on page 2 of part 2, you know, of the local section. So it doesn't move folks anymore. But there have been protests. There's going to be a big protest and rally in about a week involving youth who would then turn around and go talk to other youth about
senseless violence. But there's a double standard, isn't there, Michelle?
Oh, there is totally, and it's so sad that we as a society don't make this a bigger issue. This is dog bites man, it's no big deal, but man bites dog, and it's a big story. Yeah. So it is something that we definitely need to address.
Oh, but it's also, I think the other piece of this is, remember, Trayvon Martin was not attempting to kill anyone or rob anyone. There was no like crime motive at the time.
A lot of the young black people who
he had a bag of
Chicago
Skittles. Okay, but so what happens in the Trayvon Martin case? I think another reason it got elevated, you were asking about that, is because he was not involved in a crime at the time.
Actually, a lot of people that are killed are not involved in a crime at the time.
That's
it was elevated because it was a political tool in order to advance a certain ideological agenda. You may not want to hear it, but we're going to tell you anyway, so let's dish out some unsolicited advice. Michael Holt.
Well, mine goes to the president, and it's about unintended consequences of what y'all call Obamacare. Mr. President, please prioritize, you know, remedying these unintended consequences before they become unintended consequences.
Michelle.
Well, now that Detroit has filed for bankruptcy, this is advice to every public employee bargaining unit out there. Help your employer balance their books, or you might not have a pension.
Linda Bruin.
Wow, my advice is almost exactly the same as Michelle's. Mine is also but it's to local elected officials. I believe some of the local elected officials in Milwaukee County, as well as the city of Milwaukee, are making the same mistake that Detroit elected officials did. And so I'm really pleading for them to stop it and learn from Detroit.
Brian Fraley.
To the Milwaukee teachers who organized protests and continue to organize protests over the Trayvon Martin shooting, killing, try exercising the same amount of passion in your classroom and do your job, and maybe you can break this cycle of failure at MPS.
My unsolicited advice: on Friday, I read that Honda has created a lawnmower that will go 130 miles an hour. My advice is, just because they made it doesn't mean you should buy it. Scary stuff. Next on Sunday Insight, are unions having buyer's remorse on Obamacare? Well, Obamacare has some new critics. You're used to conservatives complaining about the problems with the new health reform law, but last week some unlikely opponents joined the chorus of complaints. Labor unions, who had been some of the bill's biggest backers. In a letter signed by Teamster boss James Hoffa and others, the labor bosses complained their support for Obamacare had, in their words, come back to haunt us. Unless the law is fixed, they said, Obamacare will shatter not only our hard-earned health benefits, but destroy the foundation of the 40-hour work week. that is the backbone of the American middle class. Wrote the union bosses, the unintended consequences of Obamacare are severe. Perverse incentives are already creating nightmare scenarios. And they complained that employers were cutting hours and jobs. The bill hammered nonprofit health plans, and the law will impose a huge new tax on so-called Cadillac plans. So, Michelle, is this the end of a beautiful friendship?
You know what I think was more beautiful about that letter actually is what Hoffa wrote. He said, "We have been strong supporters of you. In campaign after campaign, we have put boots on the ground, gone door to door to get the vote out for you, run phone banks, raised money to secure this vision, and now it's come back to haunt us." It's almost like the president unfriended them on Facebook. So I'm kind of curious to see what the president's going to do about this, because part of me believes he's actually going to make them exempt. Because what is it going to hurt all of us in the future? I mean, it's going to maintain the Democrat base that they need in 2 years from now to control the Senate in the future. So I wonder if that's what he's going to do.
What's fascinating, because, you know, in fact, even Michael Holt now was talking about unintended consequences. It's just now dawning on them that this was a very poorly designed, very poorly written law.
Well, you know,
where did we hear that before?
Well, the problem was, number one, the unions had to support Barack Obama through the elections.
Yeah.
See, now they can go with their own little separate agenda because they're worried about themselves and not the 30 to 50 million other people who would be able to get some insurance. But, you know, this is the unintended consequences come about in part because nobody read the bill.
Yeah.
So one congressman read the bill.
Wow.
And so now they have
where did I hear this before?
Do you remember Nancy Pelosi?
Yes,
who said
I know.
You have to pass the bill before you can read it? But, you know, Michelle's right on this. These unions, now that they look at what's actually in it, are realizing that not only will it do what you put on the screen, but it also will harm their ability to unionize.
Absolutely.
And they are trying to hold President Obama to his pre-election promise, which was, you can keep the plan you want. And Obama's in trouble if he breaks that promise. He's going to have a legacy with the liberal side in this country.
The other thing that he's done by picking and choosing what parts of the law he imposes and which part he delays, he basically picks winners and losers. He's now signaled, hey, you know what? This law is still subject to negotiation, and if I'm going to give a break to you, then why don't I give a break to you?
Well, and they're mad at that.
And that starts to unravel the entire edifice of Obamacare. Is what they said this week the same thing as what you heard? Let's go around the table. Michael Holt.
Well, what I heard from a juror in the George Zimmerman case was both Trayvon and Zimmerman were equally responsible. Now, actually, what I really heard was an excuse from somebody who wanted to get around the serious facts.
Michelle Litton.
Well, we heard Congressman Elijah Cummings ask an IRS agent, did the White House call you in Cincinnati and tell you what to do? Obviously no. But what I heard was a little desperation, and that Pandora's box with the IRS has now been opened.
Linda Boone.
Well, when Russian President Vladimir Putin told Edward Snowden that engaging in activities harmful to Russian-U.S. relations would be unacceptable, what I heard him say was, it was fun annoying the United States government for a while and allowing you to stay in my airport, but now you're becoming a liability, and I'm looking for any excuse to get you out of here.
Brian Fraley.
Okay, President Obama said during the campaign, we refuse to let Detroit go bankrupt. What we actually heard was, I refuse to let the auto unions destroy themselves. Had nothing to do with the city of Detroit.
Well, as you know, what they said, the president said, you get to keep your doctor, you get to keep your health insurance. What I heard, suckers. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Michael Holt, you're first.
Well, my losers are all of those who thought the scales of justice were equally balanced. Zimmerman proved that's not true. My winner, I'm going to be a little selfish here, is my brother John, who was ordained into the ministry this past week. We need as many people praying with and for us as we can get these days.
Michelle Litchens.
My winner is 48-year IRS veteran Carter Hall, who testified Thursday that he was taking orders about additional Tea Party scrutiny from one of Obama's political appointees in Washington, totally discrediting the administration's story that Tea Party groups were targeted by rogue agents in Cincinnati. Mr. Hall, thank you for not taking the fifth. My loser, again, is Eric Holder, who told the NAACP, it's time to question laws that senselessly expand the concept of self-defense, and victims have a duty to retreat. If I'm being attacked, I'd really like to focus on staying alive and not worrying about being prosecuted for defending myself. Please retire soon.
Linda Rude.
Well, my loser is a disgusting social media trend called Trayvoning. Done by mostly white teens, people post pictures of themselves lying motionless on the ground, holding Skittles and iced tea to imitate Trayvon Martin's dead body. My winners are two African-American teenagers from Pennsylvania, Tamar Boggs and Chris Garcia. Last week, after noticing a suspicious car while helping in the search for a kidnapped 5-year-old girl, these two heroes chased the car with their bikes until the rattled kidnapper let her go.
Brian Fraley.
My winners this week are Wisconsin's workers. New job numbers show that there are more of you. Thanks to Act 10, public employees can now choose your own political affiliations, and thanks to the budget, they now have greater freedom to live where they want. Sorry, Mayor Barrett. My losers, labor unions. You helped bankrupt Detroit, you almost killed the Twinkie, and you're just now realizing that Obamacare is a train wreck.
Well, my winner is the criminal justice system. I think the jury made the right decision in both the George Zimmerman and the John Henry Spooner cases. They decided that Zimmerman had acted in self-defense and that Spooner was a nasty, addled, violent old coot, but not insane. And that makes him my loser of the week. Spooner's lack of remorse and lack of sympathy will get him a prison cell for the rest of his life and a toasty spot in hell after that. Thanks for joining us. Join my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week.